Good evening. My name is Susan Spurlock. I'm the Executive Director of Ford Hall Forum at Suffolk University, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program, both for those of here at Suffolk University and those who are watching the program on YouTube, which is being live streamed by GBH Forum Network. I'm delighted to welcome you to an evening with Odie Henderson, the chief film critic for the Boston Globe, upon the publication of his book, Caesars and Foxy Cleopatras, The History of Blaxploitation Cinema. Caesars is a spirited history and definitive account of Blaxploitation cinema, the freewheeling, often shameless, and wildly influential genre from a distinctive voice in film, history, and criticism. Odie grew up watching Blaxploitation films, which he loves, without irony, but with plenty of self-awareness and humor. Blaxploitation was a major trend, but it was never simple. The films mixed self-empowerment with exploitation, base stereotypes with essential representation that spoke to the lives of Black people and the fantasies of Black viewers. The time is right for a reappraisal, understanding these films in the context of the time and exploring their lasting influence. And Odie knew that. The time is right. The time is tonight. To our YouTube audience, welcome. We are so happy that you are joining us. We look forward to you joining the conversation and putting your comments and questions in the chat, which is being monitored. And we would love to get to your questions and comments when we get to that point in the program. I'd like to recognize the evening's co-sponsors, Suffolk University's Communication, Journalism, and Media Department, our Office of Diversity, Access, and Inclusion, our Student Center for Diversity and Inclusion, Suffolk University's Black Alumni Network, GBH Forum Network, and I'm very proud to say that this is a program of Suffolk University's RAM Inclusion Week, which is a series of programs taking place all this week in honor of Black History Month. I'd like to thank the Lowell Institute for their generous funding, which makes programs like this evening's possible. The evening's moderator is Candace McDuffie, who is a nationally acclaimed senior writer at The Root, who focuses on the intersection of race, gender, and entertainment. Her work has been featured on digital platforms such as Rolling Stone, MTV, Forbes, Paper, Spin, Newsweek, Entertainment Weekly, Glamour, Vibe, Tidal, Marie Claire, Essence, the Boston Globe, NPR. I can go on and on. And Candace is also the author of a highly acclaimed book, 50 Rappers Who Changed the World. It is now my pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest who's joining us on the Ford Hall Forum podium this evening, Odie Henderson. Odie.
Thank you. I'm going to read a couple of brief selections from the book. Let's see how this goes. Some may ask why this book is giving what many consider a disreputable a series of films the spotlight. Indeed, Blaxploitation did at times depict unsavory or stereotypical portrayals of Black people, sometimes crossing the line of what was acceptable. Yet looking at these films with contemporary eyes requires adjusting one's mindset to engage with them in the context of the time in which they were made. However, that does not mean that one's outrage is unwarranted if it is still the outcome. Just keep in mind that said outrage is not a new phenomenon. As early as September 20th, 1972, a mere month after the release of Superfly, the Associated Press ran an article entitled "CORE Asks Hollywood to End Black Exploitation Movies." CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, is represented in the AP article by its chairman, Roy Ennis. At a press conference, he demanded that Hollywood should not release any black movies unless they had the CORE seal of approval. CORE will take any action to stop these films from being produced, Ennis said at a press conference. As Paramount Pictures found out at a screening of Coonskin, these actions included violence. Keep in mind that this article ran before Coffee, The Mac, Foxy Brown, and many other well-known blaxploitation films had been released, let alone made. The article cited Comeback Charleston Blue and Shaft, two of the tamest instances of blaxploitation. Hell, Charleston Blue's rated PG. Ennis did mention Superfly as a catalyst, which makes sense, as that's the film that the term blaxploitation was coined for. But more credibly, more credibility would have come from a mention of The Legend of N-Word Charlie, which opened in March of 1972 and had that slur in its title. "We are sick and tired of these bad films being made," said Ennis, "destroying the black image and producing the wrong kind of symbol for black youth." But even his outrage wasn't new. Black intellectuals had taken Sweetback's Baadasssss song Behind the Woodshed the year before. There's no mention of that movie in the AP article. Instead, the reporter listed the demands CORE was attempting to impose on Hollywood. Ennis said these demands were not censorship, but they damn well sounded like it. In fact, CORE was attempting to do to Hollywood what the Hays Code had done 40 years prior. CORE wanted the studios to submit all scripts involving black characters to their board, which had the right to reject them outright and force changes to be made or films not to be made. CORE also wanted to pre-edit any movie before it came out, just in case something got through that they missed. Not even the Hays Code's chief censor, Joe Breen, had the ability to edit a movie that was already made. So Ennis was clearly chasing rainbows here. By itself, CORE would not have made much of a difference, but Junius Griffin, the soon-to-be-fired head of the Hollywood Beverly Hills NAACP, yes, Beverly Hills had an NAACP, and the coiner of blaxploitation, was also on board with stopping these films from being made. He complained that kids should not see these films, but he made no mention that perhaps this was a parental responsibility, not Hollywood's. Additionally, Reverend Jesse Jackson said that these movies were a major target of his PUSH initiative as well. These forces came together to form the Coalition Against Blaxploitation. "We want to show the movie industry how to make Class A black films," said Ennis, a man with zero filmmaking knowledge whatsoever. The one good idea he did have was for a portion of successful black movies' profits to go towards scholarships for teaching black people how to make films. This would have certainly made a difference and allowed some form of balancing scales to occur. Shockingly, Hollywood didn't tell these folks to kiss its white ass smack in the crack. In November 1972, another AP article appeared, this one with the title, "Minority Groups to Screen Films." Its first paragraph read, "At least 10% of the audience of all feature film screenings at major motion picture studios will be minority group members who will offer criticism of the movie's relevancy and credibility. The Coalition Against Blaxploitation, now known as the CAB, would attend all screenings, not just of black-themed films, and rate them on a 1,000-point scale. The studios have never allowed themselves to be censored," the spokesperson for the CAB erroneously stated. See the Hays Code for that. "All we want is to give recommendations to be heard." The article further stated that talks between the studios and the CAB were ongoing, with more concessions possibly granted. Both sides agreed there was no way in hell anybody but the studio or the filmmakers was going to edit a movie. Protesting movies was still an option, however. In response to the CAB's demands, white film critic Stephen Farber wrote a February 1973 article in Film Comment magazine called "Censorship in California." While he agreed that the civic groups have the right to protest the fact that these movies employ so few blacks behind the camera, he expressed concern about what the CAB considered respectable. He was no fan of the film Ennis and Company kept holding up, Marty Ritt's Sounder, calling it sanctimonious. and reminding the readers that, unlike Superfly, Melinda, Shaft, Sweetback, or Charleston Blue, Sounder wasn't directed by a black guy. It was, however, written by the black guy who wrote Melinda, Lonnie Elder III. Farber further stresses, according to the protest groups, the fact that black audiences flocked to Shaft and Superfly is only a symptom of racial oppression. In other words, black audiences didn't know it was really good for them. The determination of moralities, black or white, should never be underestimated. Personally, this author agrees with Farber on that point. The respectability of Negroes who tell blacks they need to act in a way they approve and to be accepted by the majority are a major thorn in my side. Some of the images in Blaxploitation are scandalous, but the CAB and other more recent people, like proven hypocrite Bill Cosby, lecturing and guilting black people into their version of conformity is more offensive than any image on the screen. Plus, it's not like today, where everything under the sun is available at the fingertips of those who probably shouldn't have access to it due to their age. In the Blaxploitation era, one had to either physically go to a theater or wait until the movie showed up on TV in a chopped-to-bits format. The CAB gave no responsibility to parents in terms of policing the habits of their kids. It's the same old argument. Who will protect the children? That shouldn't be a movie's job. This author was too young to remember anything about the CAB growing up, but he does remember 2 talk show appearances by the late Roy Ennis that ended violently. In the first, Ennis knocked over Reverend Al Sharpton on repugnant talk show host Martin Downey Jr.'s show. In the second, he contributed to the near riot that resulted in Geraldo Rivera getting his nose broken by a chair on his equally repugnant talk show. In both of those instances, Ennis looked like, well, a Blaxploitation character. So much for respectability. You can't beat them, join them. Hey, there's me. While that's up there, let me read you this. Every genre has its Citizen Kane. That is, the greatest movie in its canon. Superfly fits the bill for Blaxploitation. Its screenplay by Philip Finty is tightly constructed, with hustler characters breathing life into that one final score trope commonly found in heist movies. It is very well acted, with few exceptions. The reviews are better than most of the films that preceded and succeeded it. The soundtrack became a best-selling classic soul album, and its fashion sense, inspired by Nate Adams' costume choices and the actor's own closets, started a trend so widespread that it influenced this book's author's mother, who dressed him in a rust-colored Superfly coat and hat ensemble when he was 3 years old. He looked fabulous. One final thing. So, when did Blaxploitation officially begin? There are several possible answers to that question. As we'll soon see, the term itself was coined after Superfly by Junius Griffin, the head of the NAACP in Los Angeles, but was used to describe the entire set of movies released by that point. This is well before many Blaxploitation movies had been released. The era had yet to produce the Pam Grier tetralogy or any of the films featuring the trio of machismo known as Brown, Williamson, and Kelly. Blackgill hadn't even bitten anybody yet. The Mac hadn't unleashed the power of the player's ball, nor had Dolomite uttered one rhyme. That leaves a few options. Since the Shaft marked the entry point, what about Sweetback's Baadasssss song? Melvin Van Peebles had a fit every time anyone referred to his film as, quote, a Blaxploitation movie, end quote. Technically, he's correct. For if we were to operate solely on logistics, Blaxploitation did not exist until Junius Griffith coined it in 1972. That's far from a satisfactory or definitive answer. Arguments abound for the true heir of Blaxploitation's origin story. I think the better question to ask is, what was the film that most influenced Blaxploitation? Shaft and Cotton Comes to Harlem set the standards for cops, detectives in the genre. Coffee and Cleopatra Jones ushered in the era of badass black heroines. Buck and the Preacher expanded the market for black westerns that would fall under the Blaxploitation banner. But many of the films that came in the latter half of the era tried to emulate the grit and salaciousness of Sweetback's Baadasssss song. While I believe that Van Peebles' movie is the era's most influential film, I'd like to make the case that the blueprint for Blaxploitation was drawn 3 years earlier by Uptight, Jules Dassin and Ruby Dee's 1968 take on Liam O'Flaherty's novel The Informer. In the Blaxploitation documentary Is That Black Enough For You?, director Elvis Mitchell makes a brief reference to the film Uptight. The brief reference that ties Uptight to the Blaxploitation era, which made me even more confident in my own theorizing. The film features so many of the elements that are associated with Blaxploitation, and it does some of them better than the films that succeeded it. The script by Dassin Dee and her co-star Julian Mayfield handled the black militant angle with a verisimilitude, I can never say that word, unmatched by any film before or since. Mayfield and future Blaxploitation legends Raymond St. Jacques and Max Julien play this plotline with such realism that the viewer can feel the tension, anger, and the violence boiling over on screen. Uptight has other ingredients of the Blaxploitation canon. For starters, the score is by Booker T. Jones, who plays it with his band, the MGs. Though it's not the first score by a black composer, the work of Quincy Jones and Duke Ellington preceded, it is the first one to lean into the trappings of soul music. Booker T and the MGs were artists on Stax, the same label that employed Shaft's composer Isaac Hayes. The soundtrack's most well-known composition, Time is Tight, is a play on the film's titular adjective. In a rare vocal performance, Jones sings the film's hauntingly beautiful theme song, Johnny, I Love You, over John and Faith Huble's animated opening credits. Amid their images, the Hubleys pay homage to photos by Gordon Parks. We've got a soul song over a funky opening credits. Add to that the location of Uptight, Cleveland, Ohio, one of the northern cities to have a, quote, hood. In this case, it's called the Huff. As Harlem, Detroit, Chicago, and Oakland would be in Blaxploitation films, the Huff is another character in this film. It's in the scene of police brutality and uprisings and serves as the final resting place for more than one of the film's protagonists. Dassin shot on location, just as Ossie Davis would do for Cotton Comes to Harlem. In keeping with the source material, 1935's The Informer, which won director John Ford his first Oscar, Uptight has two characters coincidentally mirror the types of heroes normally found in Blaxploitation. There's Tank, Mayfield, the conflicted man pulled into a situation he needs to overcome to get out of the game, and there's Johnny, Julian, his militant best friend and the subject of Johnny, I Love You, a man of action willing to use violence to achieve his goals, yet who still has a soft spot for his mother. Julian will play a variation on both of these tropes in The Mac, and his mother in that film and this one is played by Juanita Moore. There's even a white sidekick / ally in Uptight, though this film handles him quite differently than Blaxploitation films would do later. Here, he's the lawyer and friend of B.G. St. Jacques in one of his best performances, the Revolutionaries group's leader. Once Johnny returns to, telling my time's up, but almost done. Once Johnny returns to town and the group starts planning more acts of disobedience, BG dismisses the white guy, effectively kicking him out of the picture. Thank you for your service, he basically says, but it's black folk business now. Let's not forget there's Lori, a man squeeze for Tank, played by Dee. Unlike many Blaxploitation women before Pam Grier, her role is more than just a side piece. She and Johnny are the only characters Tank ever loved, and when he becomes an informer for the police against BG's group, the fallout from his betrayal reverberates through their fates. There's also a scene recreated more comically in 1974's Claudine, where Laurie is confronted by her welfare worker at home. Roscoe Lee Brown, the soon-to-be Lord Byron Jones of the Liberation of L.B. Jones, plays Daisy, a self-proclaimed N-word and F-word. Though the film throws these slurs around, Daisy is given more agency than most homosexual characters of the era. Brown's flamboyance is not overdone. It's quite convincing as a specific type of gay man. However, he's still villainous and ultimately weak-willed, something that would characterize several gay characters in Blaxploitation. The one thing that Uptight truly has over the Blaxploitation films I believe it influenced was its sense of urgency and its unapologetic black rage. Made just a few months after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the film uses that event as the backdrop for its plot. Dassin opens the film with several minutes of newsreel footage of Dr. King's funeral and procession. His voice is heard in speeches as shots of the Huff appear. The character of Tank can't perform the task BG and Johnny want him to do because he's gotten drunk over MLK's death. With the Watts Uprising and other more recent rebellions fresh in the minds of the audience and the filmmakers, Uptight is able to convey that time in history when the wounds are still fresh. Even Sweetback's Baadasssss song, the film that comes closest to that level of rage, is working from more of a distance, which makes the film feel less raw than it does in Baadasssss' movie. Regardless, it's worth contemplating whether Uptight is truly the first blaxploitation film or merely the genre's first and most important architect.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Odie. Please have a seat. Candace, will you join us here? Yeah. And while Candace is approaching, I want to, Odie, I love your sense of humor. You are hilarious. You are brilliant.
Thank you.
You are shy. I've gotten to
I'm a nervous wreck.
Don't be nervous. I've gotten to know Odie a little bit during the time we've been preparing for this program. It's been a true pleasure. And it's also been a pleasure reading the book. Odie provided advanced copies of the book to both Candace and me before it was published in late January. It's a beautiful book. And thank you so much for writing this important book.
Thank you.
And we have copies of the book available for sale, and there'll be a book signing after this evening's program. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Candace.
Congratulations on the book. I had the privilege of reading it, as Susan said, and it is so rich with detail and such historical knowledge. One of the lines that stood out to me in the book was you said that blaxploitation was in my blood growing up. And we can clearly see it here, and the outfit, you know what I'm saying? Got the vest jacket on, channeling your super fly.
I'm 3 years old in that picture.
Can you talk about the impact blaxploitation had on you growing up?
So I was one of 6 kids of that little era, generation. There were 3 boys and 3 girls. I was the 4th one. And my older cousins, female cousins, would go to see Foxy Brown, or Pam Grier movies. And they would take us sometimes. We weren't supposed to go to these movies. I'm clearly too young to see Foxy Brown. But they would come out of the theater and they'd want to play Pam Grier, or they wanted to act like Pam Grier. And there was a sense of empowerment in that. And I saw them, and I saw the power they felt from Pam Grier being the hero of a movie, for starters, and also just that she was just such a badass. For me, it wasn't just Pam Grier, my first crush, but it was also Jim Kelly. I saw a double feature of Into the Dragon and Black Belt Jones. So this is around the same time. I don't remember which one I saw first. But Jim Kelly and his enormous afro, I mean, just like the power behind it, and he was doing martial arts, and he and Bruce Lee were kicking behind, and I was jealous of his afro because mine always looked bad. And I just felt like I was a kid that got beat up every day. Until I learned how to fight back. And watching these movies made me feel like a sense of power, that I could be like Jim Kelly. I could be like Jim Kelly, and then I would go outside and the bullies would still whip my behind. But that sense of power, I saw that. I didn't see it on television because there were no black empowered people. In fact, the Jeffersons, the first time I saw a black person I wanted to be on television, because George was rich. He was a bigot and all that, but he was rich. And so I saw that. I didn't want to be, JJ. I mean, that was my existence.
When we talk about representation in terms of blaxploitation, it kind of juxtaposes what we see black people portrayed as. Historically, from slavery to Jim Crow to Reconstruction, we have these stereotypes that are very dehumanizing.
Yes.
So can you talk about how that racism trickled down to Hollywood and how blaxploitation fought against it?
Well, keep in mind that before Sidney Poitier, when he came on the scene in 1950 in a movie called No Way Out, which I highly recommend. It's a noir. I've never seen him more angry in a movie that he didn't direct. And it was his first film. Before that, you had Mammy, you had what Donald Bogle called Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks, the stereotypes of black people you saw in films. You had Willie Best, you had, Manton Moore and these other people. And then Sidney came along and he brought some nobility to it, but then they just he couldn't do many things. He couldn't play Denzel's character in Training Day because he was basically representing all of us until 1972 when he made Buck and the Preacher. So with these movies, blaxploitation movies, the thing that I think started making people enjoy them was that, as Melvin and Peebles pointed out, Sweetback, no one thought his character was going to survive till the end of the movie, because if you were rebellious, even Sidney, you died. You never got away with any kind of crime, or you never got one over on the man. And so these movies presented that. They also presented the neighborhood. As I said, Ossie Davis shot Cotton Comes to Harlem in Harlem. And that was one of the first times you saw Harlem on the screen in all its beauty and all its disrepair. But if you lived in Harlem, or if you lived in a hood like I did that wasn't too far from Harlem, you saw that on the screen and you felt seen. You felt represented. There were drug dealers in my neighborhood. There were pimps in my neighborhood. There were sex workers in my neighborhood. There also were cops like Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones in my neighborhood, and nurses like Coffee, and people who wanted to just make a living, a black living. But you never got to see that. And so these movies, for better and for worse, put that on the screen. And, representation is power, even if sometimes it's a double-edged sword. So going to the movies as a little boy and seeing my neighborhood on the screen was an incredible feeling to a kid.
Blaxploitation came right after the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and it also incorporated the Black Power movement and these themes of Black socioeconomic struggle. Can you talk about, whether it's from Cotton Comes to Harlem or Shaft or Superfly, what makes these movies classic Blaxploitation films?
Well, Shaft coming out of Times Square at the beginning of the movie, it's kind of the epitome of the attitude of Blaxploitation. You have a cool theme song, you have a suave hero coming out of the vines, as they called them in the 70s, their clothes, his attitude walking down the street, the fact that he is the hero of the film, the smartest person, bad mother shut your mouth in the movie. They tell you in the opening credits that you were not going to see, a downtrodden brother. And that played on, once that happened, you really couldn't knock off a black character. Black Caesar famously, since it was a remake of Little Caesar, Larry Cohen had Fred Williams' character killed at the end, because that's what happens at the end of Little Caesar. And the audience rebelled so much that Larry Cohen literally went into the projection booth and cut the ending off the movie. So whenever it went to every other place in the world after its premiere, Fred Williams' character didn't die. You couldn't kill these characters anymore, because black people always the sacrificial lamb. Dirty Harry, do you feel lucky, punk? He's pointing the gun at a black person. That's a far cry from Pam Grier pulling the gun out of her afro and shooting somebody.
Very far.
Very, very far. And I think what Uptight does right, and what a lot of these Blaxploitation movies doesn't right, is the militant aspect of it. In Shaft, you have Ben Buford, his militant little group. They didn't really want to say the Black Panthers. Unless you had something like the Mac, which actually had the Black Panther involvement, you got kind of a watered-down version of militancy. But at least it was there.
Yeah.
So, that's better than nothing. I know it's crumbs and what have you, but we're talking 1972.
You can't talk about Blaxploitation without talking about the backlash these films received. And one of the most controversial, if not the most controversial film, was 1972 Superfly, starring Ron O'Neal. So I didn't know this before I started reading your book, but the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the National Urban League joined to form the Coalition Against Blaxploitation.
And CORE did too. CORE was part of it, and PUSH. All of those, every black group with an acronym.
They're all in there. So we're going to play a clip, actually, of Superfly. But before we do, they released, NAACP and CORE released a statement about the movie. It said, "The movie epitomizes, without any hint of retribution, the absolute worst images of blacks. It's an insidious film which portrays the black community at its worst. Superfly glorifies the use of cocaine, casts doubt upon the capability of law enforcement officials, and casts blacks in roles which glorify dope pushers, pimps, and grand theft." That's not true. But you guys will see it and you...
Well, let's let them make the decision.
Yeah.
And then I have a comment about them actually saying something about the cops. We'll come back to that.
This dude is bad, and he ain't just fly. He's super fly, yeah, super fly. When it comes to women, they come to him, but it's still not enough. He wants a big score, $1 million in cash, yeah. The big one.
This is a chance, and I want to take it now. Before I have to kill somebody. Before somebody ices me.
What kind of money are we talking about?
Not much.
I want his ass out working.
I quit now, then I took all this chance for nothing. Then I go back to being nothing. Working some jive job for chump change day after day. Look, if that's all I'm supposed to do, then they gonna have to kill me, because that ain't enough.
Ain't I clean, bad machine, super cool, super mean, dealing good for the man, super fly. Here I stand, secret stash, heavy bread, baddest bitches in the bed. I'm your pusher man.
Can a superfly Harlem dude beat the system? He's got a plan to stick it to the man. He's super hood, super high, super dude, super fly.
Today in Chicago, the Music Box Theater showed it, and I pointed out that Curtis Mayfield said this movie is, in essence, a commercial for cocaine. In fact, there literally is a commercial for cocaine in the middle of the movie, this montage of people enjoying their product. So what Curtis Mayfield does, and why I said this was the Citizen Kane of Blaxploitation, is because what this movie has that most other Blaxploitation movies doesn't have is the complexity. There's a moral. It forces you to make a choice. If you are for Youngblood Priest, he is basically going to, plot is he's going to sell 30 keys of cocaine so he can make a cool $1 million in 1972 money and retire from the game. It's the same old kind of heist story. I want one last score before I get out. The issue is, though, that he's selling this to black people in the hood, mostly. So if you are for him, you are basically buying into his capitalist migraine nightmare. And if you're against him, you basically are on the side of the white cops that want a piece of the action and are actually holding him down to making him think he has to do this. And the movie does not make a decision. It is shockingly amoral. However, Curtis Mayfield, whose soundtrack made more money than Superfly, the movie did, by the way, on the soundtrack, Curtis Mayfield is telling you something else. There's a narration, a counter narration going on that he worked into the music and into the lyrics and so on, where basically you're seeing all this cool stuff the Youngblood Priest is doing, but Curtis is reminding you that Freddie's dead. And you want to be a junkie? Well, remember Freddie's dead. And Pusher Man, the little song where you see him singing, is a boast. The only person that gets ahead is the pusher in that song. He's basically telling you he owns you. So Curtis is working both sides of the street here, but what he's doing is he's offering you or warning you about what was going to happen. This is not going to have a happy ending. But the movie is all cool and, great fashion, and Ron O'Neal, who said he was so upset about people blaming him for this movie. He said they blamed him for everything but Nixon's election. He made a sequel to the Superfly called Superfly TNT, which is written by Alex Haley, and is Robert Guillaume Benson's debut, and it's a god-awful film. He basically turned Superfly into some black African militant, but people that had gone to see the original Superfly wanted to see him, having sex with women and snorting coke. Meanwhile, he's preaching to you, and in Africa, no one wanted to see that. So it was an incredibly large flop. So that was the downside. He was blamed for so much. The coalition really went after him that he tried to make a corrective, and it didn't make any money, and that kind of cost him a lot of his career for a while. He's Whitley's dad on A Different World. Remember?
Oh, that's right.
So his career didn't die. He just would show up every so often, and he was Whitley's dad. I always like to point that out to remind people.
On the flip side of this, we have 1974's Foxy Brown starring Pam Grier. So you have Superfly being so controversial, this bad portrayal of black people. Then you have Foxy Brown, which is credited as one of the first films that really showcase women protagonists doing action in movies. So we're going to play a clip of that now, and then we'll get into it.
Okay.
When Foxy Brown comes to town, all the brothers gather round, 'cause she can really shake 'em down. Foxy lady, Foxy lady. Pam Grier, that one chick hit squad who creamed you as coffee, is back to do a job on the mob as Foxy Brown.
You tell me who you want done, and I'll do the hell out of it.
A chick with drive who don't take no jive.
That woman, she's crazy. There's no telling what she'll do.
She's sweet brown sugar with a touch of spice.
If you see a man anywhere, send him in, because I do need a man.
And murder if you don't treat her nice.
Sounds like a public menace.
Sure do.
Foxy's got guts. No ifs, ands, or buts.
I better warn you, I got a black belt in karate. And I got my black belt in bar stools.
She won't budge when she carries a grudge.
I want justice for all of them, whose lives are bought and sold, so that a few big shots can climb up on their back.
Sister, I think what you're asking for is revenge.
So there ain't no hope for dudes who deal dope.
I swear, baby, I don't know what you're talking about.
We're gonna kill ourselves a couple of niggas.
Have no fear, Pam Grier is here as Foxy. Foxy Brown.
So this is supposed to be a sequel to Coffee. So Coffee was the movie that basically put Pam Grier on the map. She had done some films before this, and Coffee was the first time you had a black protagonist, a female black protagonist, because Blaxploitation by this point had been mostly male. The women in these movies didn't do anything but either have sex with the hero, or bring in some information or die. Where Pam Grier now, she is the lead, and she's not. Coffee is one of the most violent of all the Blaxploitation movies. She's one of the meanest protagonists in Blaxploitation. So they wanted to give her this power, and Foxy Brown was the sequel. But the interesting thing about Coffee and Foxy Brown is that Superfly was technically a pro-drug movie, I guess if you want to call it that, whereas Coffee, the whole plot is Pam Grier is going out on the street and killing drug dealers because they hooked their sister on drugs. So they had a very strong anti-drug message, which was also new for Blaxploitation. So not only do you have a powerful black woman, you also have this anti-drug message that carries forth in Foxy Brown. And then Pam Grier, the little trivia note, the next movie she made after Foxy Brown, Friday Foster, the first black comic book character isn't Blade, it's Friday Foster. Friday Foster was drawn in the Chicago Tribune in the 70s, and they made a movie. So that first black comic adaptation is technically Friday Foster. So Pam Grier got to do that. Not only was she the first really female hero of almost any type, you had Angie Dickinson before that in a similar exploitation type film, but it wasn't common until Pam Grier showed up. And then all of a sudden, every woman had to be beating the hell out of everybody in movies instead of just being a victim. So she kind of changed that and brought that to Blaxploitation, and she never lost a fight. The last movie she made before this, she was eaten by a mountain lion. And the mountain lion was the last thing to beat Pam Grier in a movie. After Coffee, nobody would take, she had to survive to the end of the movie. She had to be the baddest person in the picture. And then you also had Cleopatra Jones the year before. So the Cleopatras, they made 2 Cleopatra Jones movies. Tamara Dobson, who once held the record for the tallest woman in film, action movies. She was 6'2", and according to Cleopatra Jones, all of it was dynamite. That same year, you had Cleopatra Jones and Coffee. That was a double whammy of these statuesque black women who were CIA agents or vigilantes, taking names. And so that changed the Blaxploitation trajectory. You really just couldn't have a woman character. Even Dolomite, Lady Reed's character has some agency in that.
So we get to the late 1970s and the early 1980s, and Blaxploitation kind of just dies out. And can you talk about it in the book in the epilogue about the demise of the genre, but can you address that here? Was it the backlash in terms of representation, or were just people tired of them altogether?
Well, I had a different theory. When I started writing the book, I had a different theory than the one I came to in the end. I thought it was just television, because television was free back then, and there were more black people on TV. That was kind of the issue. They weren't black people on television. So these movies were, big because you had to go to the theater to see this. But they started putting on Sanford and Son and the Jeffersons, and Shaft had a TV series which lasted 7 episodes. God help us. And there were other positive black characters, or at least black characters more on the screen. And then Jaws and Star Wars came out, movies with no black people in them whatsoever, and Hollywood started thinking, well, black people are going to go see a movie with no black people in it. We should make more of those, which is kind of ridiculous considering that black people were doing this before. Mm-hmm. And then Elvis Mitchell's idea was that The Wiz killed Blaxploitation, because The Wiz cost $30 million, and it didn't make its money back, although I don't know anybody that doesn't love The Wiz that's my age and black. And there's a lot of us. Apparently not enough to make the $30 million that it cost back. And you know how Hollywood is. You're a woman, you're black, you're gay. You make a movie and it's a flop, you don't get another chance to make a movie to kind of fix that. You're a white guy, you get whatever you want. So I think that combination, but I think The Wiz, they threw all this money at it. It was the most expensive black movie. Lady Sings the Blues cost money. Motown was behind that, and it was a hit. It was, Baadasssss got nominated for an Oscar. But it didn't cost $30 million. And so when that happened, black people disappeared. Unless you're a Richard Pryor or Eddie Murphy, or if you were like a rapper at the beginning of rap, like Beat Street and Break Into Electric Boogaloo, you weren't on the screen. Think about it. Until She's Gotta Have It, there was that whole new wave in '86 and going forward. Before that, how many movies outside of the ones I just mentioned that had rappers in them that were more like low budget, the next era of low budget underground cinema for black people, did you see multiple black people in the movie? Eddie Murphy didn't make a movie for black people until Coming to America. So that they were punishing us because they figured that we would go see whatever, just like before. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of what did it in. But I think people were getting a little tired of some. The movies were losing quality. Whatever something is underground and it becomes mainstream, it gets destroyed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what really happened. The movies, they started making copies, very, very inferior copies of things. Eddie Murphy says in Dolomite Is My Name, these movies have no titties, no funny, and no kung fu. I love that line. And he's right. They started making all these preachy movies like A Piece of the Action. And black people didn't want to see that. They got preaching on Sunday at church. So I think it was a combination of things. But the bottom line is, financially, Hollywood did not think that we were, viable.
Mm. Do we have time for one more question? As a veteran film critic, what is your opinion on current black filmmakers finding new ways to tell black stories?
Well, I'm all for it, but I'm afraid because I've been down this road before. The older you get, the more you realize that you start living life over and you start thinking you're crazy. I've lived through Julie Dash and all these things that saying this is a new day for black people. I think black directors and producers and people have more power than they did in 1973. But at the same time, it seems hard. I mean, Spike Lee has to fight to get a movie made. I mean, it's Spike Lee. There are things I'm enjoying. I love movies that take a different approach, like They Clone Tyrone, which is kind of a horror and Blaxploitation hybrid, but actually had a message that was a very serious message underneath it. And some of the parodic things like Black Dynamite and stuff are going on. And then you have someone like Jordan Peele, who gets a blank check. I mean, I just love that. He can just make whatever he wants. And I find that to be fascinating. He brings black people in and gives them training, people of color in, and allows them to be trained to do it. Melvin and Peebles did the same thing with Sweetback. He had to say it was a porn because the union didn't have any minorities in it. And the union wouldn't work porn. That was the way he got a multi-culti crew. You can't bring anybody, you can't learn if no one's willing to give you a job. Mm-hmm. And so I'm happy that more black and brown creatives are bringing in other black and brown creatives and telling different types of stories and promoting different types of stories. And I have hope, but I'm just still, I'm jaded. I'm burnt. I've been burnt.
Too many times.
Too many times. So it's kind of like I'm cautiously optimistic, to use that term, but I'm like, talk to me again in 5 years. Where will we be?
And on that note, we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience, so as well as those watching on YouTube. Oh.
I've not read the book, but I'm interested in the music aspect of it because the music in all these films, it seems to me, was music and was ceiling and floor. And so I'd really like to hear more of your talking about it as content, as, you know, the scene, because it's so interesting. And I just brought back a lot listening to Curtis Mayfield.
Curtis Mayfield doesn't get enough credit for this. So I'm going to give him his credit. I'm giving him his flowers. Sorry, Curtis is no longer with us. But he, without Superfly, the soundtrack album, which served as a marketing, when Melvin and Peebles started this, he did Sweetback, an album with Earth, Wind & Fire on it. And he used the album as marketing. So Sweetback was not just an album, it was also marketing. Superfly the same way, although Curtis could sing, Melvin couldn't. And Superfly, like I said, the album made more money than the movie, but the album came out before the movie, and that's what got people to go. Without Superfly, without Curtis, him making Claudine and Sparkle and Let's Do It Again, and all these other, and Short Eyes, all the soundtracks that he did, there'd be no Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. There'd be no Grease soundtrack. There'd be no Flashdance soundtrack. And by the way, Flashdance is the movie that made Hollywood believe every single film has to have an album. But Curtis and Melvin started that, and Motown became the label of Blaxploitation because they knew even if the movie was a flop, they could get a hit song out of it. They could get a hit album out of it because, you know, we buy records. And, you know, my parents had, I still have my parents' Shaft album that they bought in 1971. I have it. And so that musical element was always one of the big things about Black. I have a list of top 10 Blaxploitation songs in the back of the book. I'm sure it's controversial. But I had to include that because you can't talk about these movies without talking about their music. Sometimes that was the best thing in the movie. But we don't get the credit, as usual. We don't get the credit for, you know, as Cleavon Little says in Blazing Saddles, I bet you they won't give me credit. So they didn't give Curtis credit for that, but he did. And Blaxploitation films served as movie music as marketing before any white film did.
I have Shaft too, but I'm from Memphis.
Ah, so that makes sense.
Another question?
We have one from YouTube. Someone wants to know what your favorite film is.
My favorite Blaxploitation movie? That's hard. I mean, I guess I would have to say Shaft only because when I was a kid, I wanted to be Shaft. I wanted to grow up. When I come out of the station on Times Square, and granted, it doesn't look like it does in 1971, but I remember it. I remember the Times Square that was of the era of Blaxploitation, the fun Times Square. Whenever I come out of the station, I hear Shaft. Like, Shaft was like the epitome of cool for me. When I was writing the book, I went to Shaft's house, which is at 55 Jane Street in the Village. And I just wanted to soak up this environment. I wanted to be as cool as Richard Roundtree. The man, he just passed away. Roundtree just passed away. And I think that made my favorite movie. But I have other movies. I love Coffee. I love Foxy Brown. I love Sugar Hill, a horror movie with Marky Bay, Seeking Revenge on the Man through Voodoo, with Mother Jefferson as the voodoo priestess. Zara Cully, by the way, research her. She is one of the great black playwrights. She did so much for black actors and for black theater. By the time she got to the Jeffersons and we all knew who she was in her 80s. She was known for her elocution. She taught, how to speak, people how to speak. That's why she has such a crazy proper voice in the Jeffersons, even though she's always using it as she's drunk. But she was one of the most fascinating people that I kind of discovered when I was researching the books. I only knew her as Mother Jefferson. Mm-hmm. I never noticed she had an entire 50-year history in the black theater before that.
Any more questions?
Sorry.
Thoughts on gangster rappers who are now part of the TV and film industry, like Ice-T?
Ice-T, this is funny. Everything is tied together. They remade Superfly, not the one in 2018. In 1990, they remade Superfly. It was called The Return of Superfly, and it had the black dude from Days of Our Lives played Priest. And Curtis Mayfield and Ice-T did the score for that movie. And so, rappers, Foxy Brown, Biggie Smalls, these names, they came from rap, and then also rap, they sampled a lot of Blaxploitation music. James Brown's music and for Black Caesar is one of the most sampled, cuts for rap. So, it's all tied together. They're kind of, and then again, between the Black New Wave and Blaxploitation, there was Crush Groove and the Disorderlies and all these movies where the rappers got on the screen. And I was a teenager at the time, so I was just in love with these types of things. So it's all of a piece, I think. Everything kind of ties together.
And you explore it in the book as well.
Yeah, and so gangster rap was just another element of it. It's almost like the Sweetback, or almost like signifying, like the signifying monkey, Dolomite type thing. It kind of got, I think, away from its origins and became, again, once something becomes mainstream, it is destroyed. But I think that's kind of, they're all of a piece. They're tied together.
We have time for one more question?
We have another question.
Yeah, well, this is another YouTube question. I was surprised to see that Gordon Willis was the director of Superfly.
Parks.
Are there some of these Blaxploitation movies that are particularly well made technically?
Well, Gordon Parks, that was Gordon Parks Jr. Gordon Parks' son directed Superfly. He directed Thomasine and Bushrod, which is a Black Bonnie and Clyde, which is very, very good, with Max Julian and Vanetta McGee. Gordon Parks Sr. directed Shaft, obviously. And Gordon Parks was the photographer, and so was Gordon Parks Jr. And some of the movies look really good. And you had Lucian Ballard, who was a cinematographer in the 30s. He shot Through the Hard Way, and he shot a couple of other films. You have Michael Kahn, who became Spielberg's editor. He did 4 Blaxploitation movies. He did Spook Who Sat by the Door, which is a great movie. It was so controversial, the government pulled it from theaters because it was a recipe. It taught you how to be a black revolutionary because it was written by a black CIA agent. The book was. He also did the screenplay. And it was so dangerous to the government, they yanked the movie. So there are several movies that are very well made, and there are several movies that look like trash, but I like them anyway.
You like them anyway.
Thank you. I had 2 questions, but my first question was, what was your process like writing your book, and what is the biggest takeaway you want audience to remember from reading your book?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. The biggest takeaway I want people to realize that, for better and for worse, because I take some of these movies to the woodshed, and I criticize several elements of them. So it's not just this love fest of me just going on and on about how great they are. I think the takeaway from it is that this was an era, and just like any other era, it influences the movies that were made. And you have to look at it from what was going on, what was changing, and brought these movies in. And also, the Blaxploitation technically isn't dead. You see so many tropes and elements in movies of the day, and Tarantino, of course, does it all the time. But not just Tarantino. I think black filmmakers do the same thing. They add little kind of, little signposts, or maybe little things that you would be able to pick up on immediately that come from Blaxploitation. So the takeaway from the book is I just wanted to talk about the history of Blaxploitation and how it shaped the little black kid, me. Because the Coalition Against Blaxploitation was saying these are harmful movies. And I wanted to look at that. I wanted to look at what I got out of it, pro and con. As far as the process of the book, I've seen all these movies as a kid, and as a teenager, I worked in a video store, so we had Blaxploitation, and porn kept us open.
Those two.
And kung fu movies. So we had all that kept the store open. And so I would watch them as a teenager. So I was watching them as a kid, I'm watching them as a teenager, now I'm watching them as an old man. And I wanted to write down what I got out of it, pro and con, because a lot of times these movies were giving you a message about what black masculinity and what black femininity was. And sometimes it was a good message, and sometimes it was not a good message. So that's kind of what I wanted to look at it from the perspective of, it's not just Blaxploitation's history. In a way, it's my history.
It's your history as well.
We have time for a couple more questions. We have another YouTube question.
Who are some of your favorite actors and actresses who you feel had the greatest impact?
Raymond St. Jack doesn't get enough credit. He was a great actor, and they made a movie. There were several black versions of classic movies. There was a black version of Get Carter called Hitman. That's the movie where Pam Grier gets eaten by a mountain lion. There was a black version of The Asphalt Jungle called Cool Breeze, which has Raymond St. Jack in it, and Thomas Rasalala, another great actor. And all these actors, what's funny is you would see them on television in the 70s and even going forward. You know, Everybody Hates Chris is almost like a cornucopia of old black actors showing up in roles. Antonio Vargas, for example, it shows up in those things. So Pam Grier, obviously, because of her power and because she was a star, and Fred Williamson. I mean, he was a really bad director, but he had presence. I mean, he could play a role. He could play Black Caesar, and then he could play an almost comic role and take a hard ride. And he had a lot more talent than in front of the camera and presence than we give him credit for. Now, behind the camera is another story. But he directed. I got to give him credit. He got a lot of his movies made. He was an independent. He directed his films. He was in them. And they made money, and he raised money to make those movies. But I thought that when I was going through all these movies again, and I wrote about 84 movies in this book, I really was impressed by him, by Fred Williamson.
Last question.
Hi, so I was just thinking about the movie Coming to America. You just mentioned it briefly before. And I was wondering, because I was thinking about how that movie was praised for celebrating the African heritage in the movie, but I remember that it was also criticized because from the African community, from some African communities, because the misrepresentation of Africans in the movie. So I was wondering what your opinion was about that.
Coming to America is an interesting movie. I wouldn't say that it was in any way accurate about the African immigrant experience, but what Coming to America does that I think is genius is that Eddie Murphy, Prince Akeem, is the outsider. He's coming to a black neighborhood that you would see, like he's coming to Queens, and a lot of black folks, myself included, saw that neighborhood. We recognized the Jerry curls, and we recognized the knockoff McDonald's. In my neighborhood, there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken.
It was probably good too.
It was damn good. Anyway, and so what Coming to America does, I think, is genius, is that Eddie Murphy is like representing the white audience coming into a neighborhood that we know very well. So we're already automatically laughing, and Eddie is responding to this new world. And I think that kind of plays into the immigrant experience of coming into a new place, but I don't think it does justice to someone like Akeem's experience. It's a fairy tale, but it primarily isn't to show he's the straight man in Coming to America. The regular black neighborhood is kind of like the universe that he's coming to. He's an alien coming to this foreign planet that we all know and love. So it's not really the immigrant experience. It's him, the America, imposing its will on him. So I would agree that the criticism was probably very valid about this is not a representation of African immigrants, but I don't think that's the movie's intention.
We have time for just one more.
This is also from YouTube. Do you believe that black actors have a responsibility to present only the positive?
That's a great question to close out on. Norma R. Jones wrote an article in 1976 that asked that exact question. Can black art be free as long as we are oppressed people? And I'm not going to spoil the book and tell you what her conclusion was. She was writing about Sweetback specifically, and how Sweetback is a myth-making kind of film. But she asked that question, and it's a valid question, but I think it's an unfair question.
It's a loaded question.
It's a very loaded question because, again, it's always like we have to take it upon ourselves to educate you. We can't be, we can't be complicated. That's what was Sidney's problem until he started directing his own movies. He had to be this noble black person that was completely faultless. And no such person. I come from a predominantly black family, let me tell you.
Let me tell you.
They ain't perfect. So I think it's an unfair question, but it's a question that we have to wrestle with. I feel like it prohibits you as an artist because you're constantly thinking, I have to represent black people. We're not a monolith, so you can't really represent all of us. This book represents me as what my opinion is, but there may be people who completely disagree with my opinion. I'm not speaking for black people, I'm speaking for this one black person. But we always have to be the person to speak for all black people. Mm-hmm. And that drives me crazy because it's not fair, but it's the cross we have to bear. So, I mean, I don't have, my answer is no, but I know that is not the answer that's not the definitive answer. That's not the answer that we have to go with.
It's your answer, so yes, we do.
Huh?
It's your answer, so yes, we do.
No, we do. We do.
Odie, this has been so much fun. You'll be selling Black Caesars and Foxy Cleopatras after the event. Thank you so much for joining us live as well as on YouTube.
Thank you so much.
And
everyone.
Candace, I want to thank you. Candace has traveled from Chicago, Illinois, to be here tonight.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for your beautiful moderation. Candace and I have had the privilege of working on a number of programs together, so thank you. Odie, thank you for your heart, your humor, your brilliance, and thank you for writing this book. Congratulations to you. And thank you to the audience, our YouTube audience, for your wonderful questions. Thank you. And who's Gloria Hendry?
Gloria Hendry is an actor who was the first black Bond girl in Live and Let Die, and it's a horrible. Her treatment in Blaxploitation, the movies that are not just Blaxploitation, she was never given a good role until Black Belt Jones. She has a great role in that. She was an actor who deserved, like Teresa Randall, who deserved better, who needed to fire her damn agent. But she was the first black Bond girl.
Okay. That was another YouTube question that I wanted to see if we could throw in. So the bookstore has very, very graciously put forward a 20% discount on Odie's book. And we are setting up the book signing in the back. So I do hope you will grab a book. Odie brought his Sharpie pen, and he's ready to sign the book. So again, thank you so much for coming, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.